The real question, the thing that we are fighting over in not very clear terms in the US, is to what degree is the difference in success between different populations the result of something at the software level, that is to say, something that happens after you are born, and to what extent might it be housed in endogenous characteristics, that is to say, at the hardware level. And I, based on everything I've seen and everything I understand as a biologist, believe this is overwhelmingly, if not 100%, a software issue. Which I think is very important, because if it is a software issue, then there are remedies. They're available to us, right? How you deploy them is not clear, but we can correct that disadvantage. Were it something in the genetic layer, we would be in a much more serious situation. And so I think we have a predictable train wreck on our hands, where there's a lot of suspicion about where the differences in success reside, and they are resulting in chaos because we can't confront them honestly.
That's interesting. I think, many people don't even think about the hardware software issue. Like people who like for lack of a better word, normal people, it's not a conversation it's only a conversation I have with my friends from the intellectual space who've been to college and who, even within that, read certain books. And definitely there is disagreement there. And I think there's a lot of disagreement that only occurs in people's minds because, almost everyone is too afraid to speak honestly about this issue, or to speak openly rather, and to say the wrong thing. Right? If you're too interested in IQ, it seems weird. If you're too interested in racial differences in IQ, it's weird. And then beyond that, if after an honest reading of the evidence, you, like Charles Murray, come to a conclusion that it's at least something to do with genetics, then you're a racist. You're considered a racist, full stop. And the truth is, I think there are a lot of racists that subscribe to that view. So we have a genuine problem, which is that, if someone just enters my Twitter feed and says, I think Black people are genetically inferior, or I think the Black-white IQ gap is largely to do with genetics. If someone says that, there's no way to tell if they're a scholar who's come to a view like Charles Murray, or just a white supremacist typing from their mother's basement. And it's very tempting, even for me to just cordon that whole area of inquiry off. At the same time, I think if you're talking to a friend, at offline where reputations aren't at stake, I think I could have a perfectly rational conversation about, about this controversy, and not for a moment fear that I was speaking to a white supremacist. So it's very strange, because I feel like there are two very distinct worlds. There's me talking to a friend I've had for 5 or 10 years, over a drink, after both having read a book on the subject, and saying, to what extent are racial differences in IQ genetic or culturally determined? And I wouldn't feel any of the hair raising on my skin that I get when I feel I'm in the presence of an actual racist. But then online, that just seems impossible to do. So do you agree with that?
Yeah, which is, I'm glad we're having this conversation, because I think we are in an intermediate space where you and I can have this conversation and others can hear it and maybe learn something.
Right.
But here's where I sit. Okay. First of all, let me say the terrible stuff. Okay. IQ differences housed in genes have to have been real. There is no question about this. Okay. We know that because in order for human intelligence to have grown the way it clearly did, there have to have been differences between populations, and smarter populations have to have won out against less smart populations. So I am not arguing that you cannot have a genetic difference in IQ between populations. What I am arguing is that what we see presently does not add up in that way. And so it could be genetic. We could have a terrible answer. And frankly, if it's that answer, I don't know what we do about it. Right? It's a catastrophic failure if that's what we've got. But that's not what I expect we will find if we approach this courageously. So I do think we need to have Charles Murray's courage at looking at this, but I think he's wrong. Right? I think he's arrived at the wrong conclusion because he's got half an analysis and it seems to point in a direction. So I hate to use this example because it's so frivolous, but did you ever have a children's book called The Monster at the End of This Book?
Not that I remember.
It's a Sesame Street book where Grover is told that there's a monster at the end of the book, and he spends the entire book trying to get you not to turn the pages because of the terrifying thing that will happen if you get to the monster at the end of the book. And then you get to the monster at the end of the book, and it's him, and it's not very frightening, right? I have the sense that we are having that conversation, that there is a thing that people intuit and often do not say that causes, or if I can put this another way, some of the people that you're describing who end up in this conversation do believe in racial differences in IQ. I think they have it wrong, but it's not motivated out of racism. It's just a failure of analysis. And so partly what we need to do is exercise the demon. We have to confront what might be there in order to discover what isn't there. So what else to say? So we're really having a battle over how much of human intelligence is housed in the software layer and how likely it is that differences in the capacity of one brain or another to upload top-level software are resident in the genome.